Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Road to 2000. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and tonight I will be your driver on this journey. And I wanted to take you through some games that I actually just played last weekend at the Mid-America Open Tournament here in Clayton in St. Louis, actually. It's one of the bigger open tournaments that they have in St. Louis every year that's actually not at the Chess Club. So fun stuff. I had a pretty good tournament. I gained some rating points and won enough money to pay for my entry fee and not much else. But I played some interesting games, and I wanted to show them here tonight. And what I wanted to start with is, I think, what the title of the YouTube video might be. It's about the Old Indian defense. So in my second round, I was playing someone by the name of Timothy Radermacher, something like that. And he played the Old Indian defense against me. It had been a while since I had seen this opening. So I wanted to talk a little bit about it, why it's not so popular these days, and how it sort of relates to other openings, and how I managed to get a pretty good position and end up winning this game. So we'll jump into it. So has anybody heard of the Old Indian defense before? Do you know anything about this one? Yeah, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's bringing your knight and your bishop out with like a b6 or g6.
So you described the either b6 going for like a queen's Indian, or g6 bishop g7 going for a king's Indian. The Old Indian, way different. So basically, the best way I can describe it is it's like a king's Indian, but black's going to put this bishop on e7 instead of g7. So the game started with d4. Black plays d6. Now, if you're an e4 player and you like playing against the Pierts, you could play e4 here and transpose. I'm not one of those kinds of people, so I play knight f3. And the goal is to stop e5 here. You play c4. Now the problem is e5 might actually turn out to be a pretty good move. Black is pretty happy about any end game going on here. It's going to go c6, king, c7. And white would maybe rather not have this pawn all the way out on c4. So that's why I play knight f3, preventing e5. Black plays knight f6. Now I'm not worried about playing c4 anymore. Black goes knight b to d7. I just continue developing. We get e5 by black. I play e4. And it's not too late here for black to sort of change courses and go for a more normal king's Indian setup with knight b to d7 on the board. But instead, he does play this move bishop to e7. So what's going on here? Why would black ever put this bishop on this slightly weird-looking square? Well, there are, I think, some advantages to it, although we're not going to really see them in this game. For one, a lot of the time when you put this bishop over here, let's just play some moves. Let's say white was interested in playing one of the exchange variations, just for example, and black took back with the pawn, just for example. This bishop is going to look pretty dumb on g7 for most of this game here. Why is this bishop here? It's just staring at its own pawn. You might be able to claim that it's indirectly supporting d4, and that's going to matter if black can get a knight here. But in general, this bishop is sort of stuck behind its own pawn. So you can imagine that if we did the exact same line, let's say c6 here, and takes. Now this bishop is looking a little bit more normal on e7. It's controlling all of these squares. It's helping to support something like knight to c5 to e6, for example. And maybe this bishop is a little bit better placed. At least that's kind of my understanding of why this bishop might belong here. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is maybe black isn't so happy learning all of the king's Indian theory, and he wants to play something offbeat, and this is one way to try to get your opponent out of that more normal theory. That being said, I just stuck to the normal ideas here. I did play bishop e2. Black did castle, as did I. And black did play this move c6. So the question here is, I've sort of mentioned that I'm not really loving this idea of taking on e5 right away. I'm not really loving opening up this bishop. And maybe I can talk about that a little bit more. But with that in mind, just take my word for it. You don't really want to take on here. And I'll look into it a little bit more. But with that being said, what do you want to do? If you don't want to take on e5 here, what constructive things can you do to improve your position? Hello to Chess Bunzo in the YouTube chat, by the way. Thanks for joining. How can we keep developing our pieces and improving the position? Any ideas?
Maybe you put your dark bishop on G5 maybe?
Yeah, so this dark squared bishop is, I agree, it's sort of our last piece that we want to develop. So you suggested maybe the G5 square, and it's a reasonable square. I think bishop G5 does happen in this opening sometimes. And then in the YouTube chat, Chessbunzo actually mentioned the E3 square. So which of these squares kind of looks better on the surface? Just surface level, which one would you sort of rather have? Probably E3, right? But what happens if you try to play bishop E3 right away? Something bad might happen to you. This is a really useful idea to know in these positions. So this bishop looks pretty nice, right? It's controlling all of these squares, and we're anticipating that something might happen to this pawn. Maybe black will take our pawn, maybe we'll take black's pawn, maybe we'll push d5. But either way, this diagonal is going to open up as well. So there's a beautiful bishop here, but black can harass it. So yeah, knight g4. Black's going to be able to jump out with the knight, and white is not at all going to be happy if knight takes e3 lands on the board. So I like this idea of bishop e3, and I don't like this idea of bishop g5 quite as much. I think it's perfectly fine, and if I cheat first, oh, don't look at that. Okay, don't look at that either. If I cheat for a second and I go to a database, yeah, bishop g5 has been played before with like some mixed results, but it's a very reasonable move. Now, I didn't really want to go for it in the game because something about the Old Indian defense and really the King's Indian is always that white has more space in the center, right? So when you have more space, it's usually a good idea to leave as many pieces on the board as possible. You don't really want to be trading pieces when you have more space. And we'll see why in a moment in this game, but in general, the idea is if you don't have as much space and you have all your pieces left, they're going to start to get in each other's way. You just don't have enough squares to find a good spot for all of your pieces. And in the meanwhile, white has enough space to find good squares for all the pieces. And we'll see that sort of arise later on. And so with bishop g5, the thing that you might run into is simply h6. And I don't think you're really happy giving this bishop away here. And maybe one of your ideas is to just sort of try to reroute the bishop back to g3. Let's say something like queen c2, knight h5. And in the only game where this has been played, white did actually take on e7. Maybe you can justify trying to bring this back to g3 and put pressure on e5, but I'm not really convinced. So I wasn't in love with this idea of bringing this bishop out to g5 for those kinds of reasons. I want to leave pieces on the board. I want to make my opponent's life difficult, and I felt like bishop g5 might lead to this bishop just getting traded off. So putting that all together, not in love with bishop g5. I do really like this e3 square, but knight g4 is a problem. So with all of that in mind, what move now might come to mind for white? Focusing on this bishop e3 idea.
h3?
That's exactly right. We just want to play h3, prevent this knight from coming to g4, and we'll take our time. We'll take our time with things and play bishop e3 soon. That being said, I didn't do that yet. I actually chose to play queen c2 first, which I think is a pretty good idea. So what's the point of queen c2? Well, I actually want to bring this rook over to the d file. And I did these things first before playing bishop to e3. So that's something else that you can do with this dark square bishop is sort of wait a couple moves, let black make a couple more decisions as long as you have useful moves to play, and then you can play something like h3. So I did go queen c2 first. My opponent played queen to c7, which is all very normal for this opening. He wants to support his pawn. Rook to d1, rook to e8, and now we are going to see this h3 idea. And I had known just from memory that this queen c2 rook d1 idea was pretty decent here. But then after this, I was sort of playing out of book. I didn't know any theory. I mean, I had some idea of the plans and came up with h3 on my own. Turns out it's one of the best moves. So h3 played in the game. Now, I believe my opponent has sort of run out of things to do, which is something that kind of happens in this opening if white is very, very patient. So what black is really like hoping and praying for here is that white gets impatient. White takes on e5, which allows black now to play for these kinds of plans. It gives black the c5 square. Or white plays something like d5, which again is going to open up the game a little bit for black. It's going to give up some of these dark squares. Knight c5 again is going to be an idea, maybe a5 first, then knight c5. And black again is going to be playing with ideas in the center. But if white does something like h3, like I did in the game, yes, this move looks very slow, but because black just doesn't have enough space, black is running out of useful things to do. Like, you can try to reorganize your pieces, but you're never really going to have enough squares. So black did find one more useful move. He played this move a5, which is just a generally good move. It takes space on the queen side. It helps prepare for a knight c5. Again, if white gets impatient here, knight to c5 in this position, and black might be doing well. And I promised I would talk a little bit more about why I didn't want to take on e5, so I guess I'll do that now. So after takes on e5 and takes on e5, you might still think that white has more space in the center, right? Because we have our pawn on c4 versus this pawn on c6. We have good control over d5. It looks like we have more space. But actually, this structure really heavily favors the player with the black pieces. Now, does anybody know why? Why is black doing well here in this structure? It has to do with these two pawns. This is the big difference in the structure. So not really b5. It's actually just about these central squares. So white is, yes, controlling the d5 square very well. But black is also actually countering this square. So it's difficult to imagine how white is going to play a move like knight to d5. And to your point, also b5. b5 is defended. Not so much black trying to push on this side, but just preventing white from advancing forward. Meanwhile, after, let's say, bishop e3, knight to c5, and let's just play another move for white. Let's say knight to e6. Now all of a sudden you can see black can't immediately jump to this square, but black is always going to be the one threatening to jump in with the knight. Meanwhile, we're never really able to get this move knight to d5 through. And in the long run, black is going to have very serious chances to claim c5 or claim d4 as an outpost. Maybe we'll even see bishop c5. These guys might get traded off. And then in the long run, again, black's going to come over and play knight d4. And so these structures in general tend to favor black because, again, in chess, pawns don't move backwards. So the c-pawn can never kick out a knight that lands on d4. Meanwhile, black still has this nice c6 pawn that's preventing our play on the queen side. Now, the exception to this, because white does go for these structures quite a lot, is when we can prevent this knight from getting to e6, basically. So oftentimes you'll see this happen. Let's say just some nonsense moves. Let's say black gives us like a free tempo here. If we can get some position where white has played like c5, then you could very seriously consider going for this because you're preventing this move knight c5, and you're making black's life a little bit harder to actually achieve this kind of knight e6, knight d4 type of position, and we're playing over here a little bit more quickly. But it's good to know that, in general, statically, this structure should favor black. And it's because about the central squares. White just simply has no control over d4, and black is fighting back against our control over d5. So, once again, the point I'm trying to make here, black is really, really hoping that white loses patience and does something in the center. They want us to blink first. They want us to give them this c5 square and allow them to do this kind of maneuvering and play against the weaknesses that are made when you push all your pawns forward. So instead, white should just stay patient. So what was our plan with h3? What did we want to do? Bishop e3. That's right. So that's what I played here. And now we do actually reach this point where black is almost entirely out of useful things to do. You can argue that you could play the move bishop f8, but we'll see black had other ideas in mind for this bishop. So he's out of useful things to do, so he's the one who has to break the tension in the center by taking on d4. So I will take back. And now, obviously, what is the big difference between this structure and the one that we were just looking at? There's something very important that's way different.
C5?
For black?
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have the C5 square available.
Yeah, OK, so they have the c5 square available, but let's compare it to this structure.
Oh,
so what's difference between this structure and after bishop e3, take.
The semi-open e5?
Yeah, black's e5 pawn is a d6 pawn, so that's going to change a lot. Number one, white still controls d4, which is a huge advantage. That means we're not really worried about knight d4 from black. In fact, we're the ones who are occupying the center with our pieces. And on top of that, black is left with this weak d pawn on the half-open d file. Now, what's the benefit for black? Well, black does get this c5 square that he so desperately needs because he was low on space, had nothing to do with his pieces. And as pointed out, yes, the half-open e file is also there. So black is going to try and get some counter pressure against the e4 pawn. So in the long run, what is black really trying to do here? What is black's big idea to equalize? You know, it's pretty far-fetched in this position, but in your ideal world, like play maybe like 5 moves in a row for black, and you might have something. What do you think?
Sorry, does black want to find a way to play d5?
Yeah, in some like fairyland world, we want to play d5. We want to play d5. We want to get rid of white's extra central space and just be totally equal. Barring that, maybe black is going to try to pressure e4, force us to make a weakness, and then maybe try to play on the king side somehow. But the thing about the Old Indian is that black's pieces just aren't very well set up for this, in my opinion. It's very hard to sort of organize around this d6 pawn. Like your queen on c7 can never really get to the king side as long as the d pawn is there. And it's just going to be very tough. So yeah, maybe we can play for d5. Maybe we can actually play for something like b5 in this position, which was brought up a little bit earlier. The point sort of indirectly being if we can get rid of the c pawn, then maybe again we can try to play d5. But very tough here for black to find those active ideas. So instead, practically what happens is after knight to c5, black is sort of just going to try to organize his pieces a little bit, get them all in reasonable squares, and then just sort of wait for white to do something, and then try and find some kind of counterpunch, which we'll look at. So after knight to c5, let me double check myself here. Yeah, so I think this is the worst move I played in the game. So let's just do some counting. Knight to c5, my e4 pawn is attacked twice. Given another move, black might play bishop f8 and attack my pawn a third time. And given a fourth move, maybe black can even try queen to e7, attacking my pawn a fourth time. Kind of scary. So in the short term, I need to figure out how am I going to defend the e pawn. Now the way I chose in the game maybe is not the most natural way to organize the white pieces, but I'm curious if you guys can come up with how you would defend the e4 pawn in this position. So we know sort of our opponent's next move is probably bishop f8 and attacking our e pawn. So how do we want to anticipate this? How do we want to get ready for this to come? We could also just ignore it until it happens, but then once it happens, we have to have something in mind. So bishop f8 is the idea that I was worried about. Yeah, Brian?
I'm thinking about, it seems kind of weird, but I'm thinking about bishop f3 to also open up
open up the space for our rook to come back to e1 maybe?
Yeah, so bishop f3 is one of the big ideas that I was looking at, definitely. There's a couple other ones that I want to at least touch on before we get into details. So bishop f3 is maybe the easiest solution. You know, it's one move, your pawn's defended again. You don't really have to worry about your pawn. But what else is there? Someone in the YouTube chat mentioned the very interesting idea of knight f5, which might not work immediately, but is definitely good to keep your eye on. Sort of meeting the play here with play on d6. Does this actually work? I'm kind of curious. Black might not be so unhappy about some move like knight takes e4 here. And if you take me, I'll take back, and maybe I'm getting away with it. If you take here, I'll take here, check, take. And yeah, maybe this does look nice for white, but black has taken one of your pawns. So you have to be careful with this knight f5 idea. There are some tactics there. And then what else? It might be kind of an ugly move, but what is the most solid structure that white can make here?
Pawn to f3?
Yeah, just pawn to f3, right? Either immediately or after bishop f8. We can put the pawn on f3, but what is the big downside to pawn to f3? Why did I call this move ugly?
Opens up g3 for an outpost?
Yeah, it opens up g3, and it actually further weakens f4 as well. It weakens both of these dark squares. So it's pretty clear how it weakens g3, right? You know, this pawn was defending g3, now it's not. How does it weaken f4? Well, it's a lot harder to play a move like g3 if your pawn's already on f3 compared to f2, right? So because now we're never really playing g3, it's going to be harder to defend our f4 square as well. So in the game, I was calculating lines following f3. I was looking at knight to h5. And I didn't really love allowing this knight into g3. And I was looking at g4 here, believe it or not. But when after knight to g3 actually does come, I couldn't really tell if I was actually going to be trapping this knight or not. And I have to play some ugly move like bishop to d3 to avoid this trade. And I just didn't love it. Now it turns out that this was the correct idea, but there's actually an improvement here. So white can actually play bishop f1 in this position, of all things. And then after bishop f8, I can go f3. And now if you try knight to h5, who sees the idea here? Why is this difference?
After g4, knight g3, bishop g2, and then you've got the knight trap?
That's exactly right. The big idea is that we can do a sneaky little reroute with our bishop here over to g2, and then black is just going to be in big trouble. This knight is hard to save. Like you can try like h5, but I'm not so sure that it's really going to help you. I'm just not going to take. I don't know if I want to go king h2, stepping on this diagonal, but I can go maybe queen f2, king f2, and even if you play h4, in the long run, this knight's going to be very, very sad on the g3 square. It's just going to be totally trapped, and I think white should be able to pick it up somehow. Let me double check, make sure I'm not like totally lying to you guys. Yeah, okay, bishop f2 or queen f2 are both good, and if h4, even, yeah, just f4 here. And like this knight is totally stuck. You're at least losing a pawn, and maybe more with ideas like knight f3 and knight h4. So turns out that this was the correct idea. Now, perhaps understandably, I was a little bit wary of this g4 idea. You know, I felt like I had a pretty good grip on things, and I didn't really want to go nuts on the king side. But as someone in the chat pointed out, bishop f2 here is also perfectly reasonable. This knight is going to get to a square on f4, but it turns out this is also a very reasonable way to play. Now, in the game, I did actually go for bishop f3, but this is going to be, you know, just a little bit unnatural. I don't think it's a bad move by any means. White still is significantly better, But the danger here is that by defending this pawn with the bishop, you've sort of limited your options. F3 is now illegal, and your bishop is actually really useful on the queen side, as we'll see in a little bit. So here, black should still go for this bishop f8 idea, and then white is actually going to want to reroute the rooks, like Brian was saying. We can come into the center, and here once again, black is sort of running out of things to do. You can play bishop e6, you can play h6, maybe h5. Maybe g6, but you're running out of useful moves with black. And in the long run, white is going to push kind of everywhere slowly. But after bishop to f3, black chose to play this move bishop e6 instead. So sort of giving up on this pressure on e4 plan now that I played the slightly awkward move bishop f3. So after bishop e6, my first question is, should we take this guy? And my next question is, what are we doing sort of in the long term? What is our plan? We've talked about black's plans, what black is trying to do, but what is our active idea here? What do we want to play for? So let's start with question number 1. Do we want to take this bishop? It's been offered. Oh, and hello to Ty in the YouTube chat, who I met at this tournament, actually. Ty says, don't take the guy. And I won't tell you how good at chess Ty is. So what do we think? All in favor? All opposed? Okay, seems like the room is opposed. So why don't we want to take the guy? Because Ty said so? Okay.
Your knight's pretty good where it's at.
Yeah, this is a beautiful piece, right? This is a beautiful piece. And in general, going back, you don't want to trade pieces when you have extra space. So right now, this e6 square seems like a pretty good spot for the bishop, right? It's off the back rank, the rooks are connected, and it's pressuring our c4 pawn. However, there are a lot of black's pieces that would love to use the e6 square. He would love for the e-file to be open, so he could attack the pawn. He would love for his knight to be on the e6 square, so he can target our weak dark squares. And I guess that's all he would love, on the e6 square. So if we ever take this guy, I think even just knight e6 is probably the idea. There might be some kind of argument for f e6 and playing for d5, but I think knight e6. And black's position is suddenly much easier to play. You take off a single minor piece, and black's position is going to get easier, just because now he can do whatever he wants. He has all these light squares to play on, all these rerouting ideas with these two knights, now that this bishop's out of the way. So when you have extra space, don't trade the pieces. So that being said, our pawn's attacked. If we're not going to take the guy, how do we defend the pawn? Just keep it simple.
B3?
Yeah, b3. And don't be afraid to just shout out an answer, by the way, if you've got it. It's kind of hard to see to call on hands sometimes. So yeah, b3 is great. Just defends the structure and prevents us from getting kind of clamped down with a4 later on. Black plays knight f to d7 here. So now it's time to figure out what are we actually doing with our lives. Black is running out of ways to sort of threaten our position. So what do we want to do? In the long term, how can we make progress here? And the fun part about this position is that there are almost no wrong answers. If you see a plan, it's probably a good plan, which is why this opening is kind of suspect by black.
So he wants to play bishop f6, right?
Yeah, okay, so black is, this is good to point out, black is trying to organize the pieces here. This is probably why black avoided playing bishop f8 earlier. In the long term, he wanted to come to f6, but it's not so scary, right? Like, it doesn't come with a threat. It's just he's struggling to find squares for all these pieces. So we have a little bit of freedom here to kind of do whatever we want. Black is many moves away from doing anything that could be considered dangerous.
How about bishop f4 too? Maybe outlook on that d-pawn.
Yeah, okay. So you're going for play against the d-pawn
Yeah.
as one of the plans. So that's one plan to look for. And just for some more context, whenever I say a plan, so attacking d6 is a long-term plan, but oftentimes it also involves a change in the structure somehow. So look for those ideas as well for other plans. So piling on top of what Brian was saying with bishop f4, some people in the YouTube chat are also talking about doubling the rooks in the d file, and this is like sort of all in line with the attacking the d pawn plan, which I think is a good one. Any other ideas? Yeah, what do you think?
I mean, like long term, open the A file. Maybe.
Yeah, so it's not so much about opening the A file. So how would you do that? What moves would open the A file?
Well, at first, yeah, I don't know. At first, I was thinking A3, B4, but there are some problems with it right now.
Yeah, so no, long-term A3, B4 is a great plan, and I actually sort of played for it in the game. However, the idea is not so much about opening the A file as it is taking away more space from black on the queen side. We want to control the C5 square. We want to be able to threaten to play B5, threaten to play C5 ourselves, and those changes in structures, that opening of the position is eventually going to be good for white. Again, we have more space everywhere, so if we can open things up somehow, it's usually going to be good for us, because black's pieces are going to be clunky, stuck where they are. So A3, B4, great plan. Again, though, it's less about opening the A file, more about taking away more squares, getting more space in these different pawn breaks. So there's one more big idea that I at least want to mention. So we can play on the queen side with A3, B4. We can play in the center by doubling up and attacking the D pawn. And our position is so good that maybe we can even play on the king side. So how would we play on the king side here?
Look to push the F pawn.
That's exactly right. So something like bishop E2 and F4. And then we'll decide later on if we want to play F5 or E5. But again, it's about taking away more squares from black, getting even more space and sort of tightening the vice grip we have on the position. So all of these I think are great. I think white is probably going to be doing better is probably going to be doing well in all of these plans. Now, I wasn't really in love with just playing like rook d2 or bishop f4 because I felt like, okay, I mean, I can't say too much because I think it is a good plan, but I think it might be a little bit overly optimistic here. Like, I think black might be going for knight e5, and if we start doubling up bishop f6, I think black might just be well positioned to sort of handle this plan. Maybe we even need to play bishop e2 first, and rook d8, for example. And yeah, we haven't really spoiled anything, but I'm not sure we're really making much progress here. You know, black is well enough defended, he's controlling this square well enough, and yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, I still like white's position, but I'm not sure this is the plan that is going to give us a bigger advantage. So in the game, I wanted to play for a3, b4. And as Brian said, I was anticipating that this bishop was going to come out to f6. So I started with this move, rook a to c1. Just, again, I want to play a3, b4, not because I'm interested in opening this up and, again, trading pieces, but because I want to be able to push these pawns forward, take away more space, play for some kind of a pawn break. And I'm also, of course, anticipating my opponent's next move. Well, sorry, not that move. But the move after, which was bishop f6. looking to target some of these weak dark squares. Just get everything defended, get my rook off that diagonal. Life is good. So he plays rook A to D8. Now, again, what's one of the problems with A3 before? Actually, I did play A3 first. So A3, bishop F6. And now, what's stopping us from playing B4 right away, if anything?
Bishop can take the pawn on C4.
Yeah, the C4 pawn is going to be loose. So the tactics, you do have to calculate a little bit. So B4 attacks this knight. So how does black actually make use of these weaknesses? So we want to find some way to move the knight away with tempo. That way white doesn't have time to deal with this well.
To A6.
Yeah, so we want to go to A6. It's better to include this. Now you go to A6. Both pawns are hanging here. It's not a big disaster for white. We can play queen to B3 if we really need to. Play knight to A2 if we really need to. Obviously, those moves I'm not thrilled with. I don't want to retreat my knight, and I don't really want to put myself in this kind of self-pin going on over here. So might as well defend the C4 pawn first so we don't have to worry about that. So what's a really effective way to do that? Remember, I wasn't really happy with this bishop on F3 anyways. Right? I don't want to be here. Yeah, what do you think? Yeah, bishop back to E2. I want to get my pawn structure fluid again. Notice, by the way, this knight is nowhere to be found on the king side anymore. There's no knight H5, knight G3 coming in. So I have absolutely no qualms about playing F3 anymore. I'm not worried at all. This knight is a million moves away from getting back to those squares. And that's the kind of thing that happens when you have less space. Your pieces start stepping on each other, and ideas that maybe you had a while ago now just aren't there because your pieces are so clunky. So bishop back to E2 is my move. Now my opponent is like terrified of this B4 idea, so much so that he plays knight to A6 to try to stop it. So he is just defending the B4 square. So now let's see if you guys are familiar with what is known as the tactic. That's all I'm going to refer to it as. So here I set up the tactic. So whenever you have these kinds of positions, these, I don't know, not quite Marazzi bind, but these sort of hedgehog-style structures where white has this extra central space and black has done C6, D6, put the queen on C7, there is the tactic that you have to look out for. So here I played queen B1, which does two things. It prepares B4, and it threatens the tactic. So my opponent was not alert enough to notice the tactic and played knight to B6, which does, in fact, hang the tactic. So what is the tactic? White to move and win. It's like more than +3. Really, really good position. And again, it's one of those positions where there's no wrong answers. White can do like normal moves and still be very, very winning because the position is just very good. But we're looking for the tactic. Yeah, Brian? Knight D5, the tactic. We did it. Bam! Oh my god, I attacked all the pieces, hung my knight to 3 different, exchanges, but it's just totally, totally winning. So have you guys seen this before? Have you seen this idea before? No? That's okay. That's totally fine to admit. So this is, I'm calling it the tactic because it is a very, very common idea in these kinds of structures whenever white has an E4 pawn and a C4 pawn against a D6 and a C6 pawn. So it's going to show up in all kinds of different Sicilians even, where you might not expect it with one C5, but maybe an exchange happens here. You get knight takes C6, B takes C6. You can end up in the structure. You can end up in the structure, like I said, from hedgehogs, from e4, e5 setups sometimes, depending on what kind of line black is playing, and of course from positions like this. So really useful idea to know. Whenever these pieces are lined up like this, it looks like there's a lot of clutter on the c file, but a lot of the time you are just able to play this knight d5 move as a sacrifice. So really great move. This just kind of wins the game on the spot. So let's go through the different captures here. First of all, what happens if black moves away? This one's really easy. The knight hangs, right? Queen was defending the knight. So you do have to capture this knight. What happens if you take with the pawn, trying to win a piece? Yeah. cd5. We hit the queen. We hit the bishop. Can't really solve all the problems here. Guess I want to try queen e7 for lack of a better square. I can just take. Maybe here I can even just take e6 and take b6. I can do a lot of things. I can leave pieces on the board. White is just going to be crushing. Maybe even this move is a little bit more mean. I don't know. Very sad position for black. I'll keep it simple, though. Let's just take a look. Take. And this rook is attacked. And this is threatened. And you've lost the game. So c takes, no good. What about knight takes? What are we planning here?
C takes seems good.
Yeah, no reason not to take with the c pawn. We want to open up, exploit this pin down the c file. Now the pawn is pinned, so black cannot take back. So we have to move this bishop. Nowhere to go besides d7. And then let's just keep the moves flowing. Supernatural chess after knight d5. Your moves start to come a lot more easily.
D takes.
Yeah, d takes c6. If you take with the pawn, there's a big problem. So bishop takes, but now of course we can continue capturing. And black actually just loses a full piece directly in this line. And this all pretty much happens by force, right? Black could have gone to c8 instead and just not recaptured here, played like knight back to b8. Insert your favorite joke about setting up for the next game. But this is obviously losing a million ways. So knight takes, no good, which is why in the game my opponent played bishop takes. But here, of course, we are, again, taking with the c pawn. This is our whole idea, opening up the c file in dramatic fashion. Black tried this idea of c5, just desperately trying to keep things closed on this side of the board. And now, again, I mean, there's a million ways to win. This is actually not a threat yet, but I did decide to move the knight anyways. f5 is just a really great square anyways. I'm not sad about moving my knight to the f5 square. My opponent tried g6. So my knight's attacked. I gave a check. And here my opponent was concerned that after king to g7, knight to g4 was going to be winning, which he was rightfully concerned about that. So he went king to h8 instead. And now our next fun move, how do we keep the flow? How do we keep things flowing, keep it moving on the queen's side? We don't want to slow down. We don't want to give our opponent a bunch of time to reorganize now that we've sort of showed our hand. We've said sort of in no uncertain terms, I'm opening up the queen's side, I'm coming for you on this side of the board. And so we want to strike while the iron's hot. We don't want to wait around, let them slowly, reorganize, bring these pieces back. We don't want any of that kind of stuff going on.
Would it be bishop b5?
Yeah, bishop b5 doesn't spoil anything at all. It's not exactly opening things up, but you're sort of correctly noting that maybe this rook is well placed on e8, and you might want to push it away a little bit. The only thing I'd be worried about is maybe black is starting to reorganize with knight to d7. I understand that this is pinning black's own pieces, but he would really love to get these knights kind of back in the game, back towards e5, things like that. But bishop b5, I mean, white's winning. White's winning everywhere. But how do we open things? We want to open lines, open diagonals. Yeah, pawn to b4 is excellent here. You know, we've got this pin going on. We've got this diagonal that we want to open up. That c pawn is the last thing standing in our way between these pieces in glory. So pawn to b4 is great. Now, tactically, what's the justification here? Takes, and obviously pawn takes pawn is no good, and knight takes pawn is also no good for the same reason. We can sacrifice the queen, if you can call it a sacrifice, and take on c7, winning a full piece. So this position does happen. I go b4. Black does take with the a pawn. And then comes up with this move, knight to a4. So now we've done all the hard work. You've sat there at the board. You've calculated and calculated and calculated. You found knight d5. You found all this stuff. Now it's fun because you get to calculate some more, but all of the lines look really, really good for you. So how do you want to beat knight to a4? There's many, many ways you can do it. You know, pick a move at random. I promise it's almost certainly going to be winning. That being said, though, your opponent is trying to get you. He is trying to get you here. I'll even draw a third arrow for that knight fork. Great Wolf has some suspicious ideas. E2 hangs with check in that line. Great Wolf, I think E2 hangs with check.
Queen to b3?
Yeah, queen to b3. I love it. That's what I played in the game. Now, if you at home wanted to take on c5, great job. If you wanted to play b5, great job. I think all of those moves win. Queen to b3, though, is what I played, and I think I don't know if it's best. It's winning enough. Very, very winning. So this knight's attacked. It goes to b2. This attacks your rook on d1. So Jack, what was the plan?
Bishop e5 is...
This one?
I'm sorry?
You said bishop e5. Do you mean bishop d4?
You said b5.
b5. Oh, okay. Bishop b5 I think is still good. But I wasn't so happy about actually letting this knight off the hook so easily. It's kind of stuck here on b2. I wanted to capture it.
That's what I thought he wanted to.
Rook d2?
Yeah, rook d2 is great. Rook d2 is great. It's winning. It's what I played. The big downside is that, oh no, we lost our e4 pawn. We're all so sad. So there's only one thing that you kind of can't do here, even though maybe even you're still winning, and that is take on b2, because black had a trick. He wants to take on b4, and your pin is worthless because queen takes, there's knight takes. And here you do get rook takes. And again, maybe you're even still doing well, but no need to allow that kind of thing. So we just take off the knight first, takes, and then I take the knight. And black is just totally lost here. Special points at home. If you realized that bishop takes b2 is never a threat, because this is essentially checkmate, you just have to start throwing away your pieces. f6 is no good, because you still get checkmated. Sad story. And rook e5, obviously, we're just going to take this rook for free. No worries there. So bishop b2, never going to be a problem, which is why in the game, black tried rook to b8. Now I just wanted to step out of this, I think, so I played queen a2. Black played queen e7, making a threat to take and fork all my pieces. So sad. So I played knight g4, just resolving the threat. Bishop back to g7. And here I just played rook to b1, which is still totally winning. Black tried h5, so I moved my knight away. Black took on b4. I took back, takes. I just brought the knight into the game. Bishop c3 was my opponent's idea. So I just offered a trade of the bishops here. I'm going quickly now because white's just up a piece. It's not quite as interesting. Takes was played, and then my opponent, I believe, missed my idea and played f6, which now it's just going to be forced checkmate. If he had played something like king to g7, I think the easiest way to win is to just go rook to c8. And the point now is that we're going to go check. If you move the king, I checkmate you. If you play queen f6, I give check and take your queen. And if you play f6, I actually do this really, really mean thing where I just come back to the c file, and there's not much you can do about rook to c7. In fact, there's nothing you can do about rook to c7. This queen cannot leave the 7th rank, and neither can the king. Kind of a sad situation here for black. And the game would just end. But yeah, it's funny that neither of these pieces can leave the 7th rank, and this happens by force. There's nothing you can do. Sad, sad times. And that's the whole game. There you go. So my opponent played f6. I gave check, check, and then he actually let me play mate on the board. Doesn't happen often. And that is how you beat the Old Indian defense. So this was sort of a long game. Hopefully the ideas in this opening started to make a little bit more sense. It was, I think, the best game I played in the tournament. And we never really lost control, which is the big thing in this opening. Because if you lose control at some point, if you start to do something, like going back, for example, if here you lose your patience and you do take on e5, it's really easy for the black pieces to just sort of spring to life out of nowhere. Suddenly the pieces all come into play, and black is doing much better than you might expect. So if there's one thing I can say about this opening, it's have patience. Don't trade the pieces. Don't allow your opponent to get pieces off the board, and you're more often than not going to be doing very, very well. So any questions for me on this opening? The Old Indian. Yeah, Jack.
A little ways forward from this position.
Yeah.
You said that the key move was queen b1 to open up the tactic.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about why that was necessary instead of just keeping the battery with the queen and rook?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So here, I'm not going to lie to you guys, I was kind of calculating knight d5 on every turn, because it's even interesting here, right? I can play knight d5, and if takes, now I want to take with the pawn, and this bishop is actually trapped. But I was thinking maybe bishop h3 is good, right? I'm giving the piece back, but sort of fracturing my kingside pawns. So with the queen in front of the rook, you would sort of expect that this is even more powerful, down the c file. But actually, what it does is it always gives black this nice tempo to trade the queens. And after the queens get traded, then black again is going to have a free turn to do whatever he wants with the bishop. And in this case, give it back on h3. So knight d5 doesn't lose with the queen on c2, but this tactic is much, much more powerful if it is just the rook opposite the queen. So this queen does a great job on b1, both defending my e-pawn and supporting b4. And on top of that, it opens up the rook so that this will be a true tempo. I'm winning a tempo by taking and opening up the c file. But yeah, great question. Any other questions? We've got just a couple minutes left here. So anything at all? Or did it all just make so much sense today? Might have just made so much sense. All right, well then, I will do a brief little recap, and we'll take it from the top, and I'll ask you guys at the key moments to shout out the moves. So let's go. This is Varakobian style. So we have our opening, so why not c4 here? What does black have? e5. And this is a very, very good endgame for black. This is not what you want to go for with white. He tucks the king on c7, your c4 pawn is misplaced. So we go knight f3. We develop the pieces normally. c6. And now this nice idea is what? How do I organize these pieces?
Queen c2, rook to go d5.
Yep, we want to bring our rook here and prepare for any opening of the d file. So queen c2 is a good start, adding more support here and opening up the d1 square. Now, what do we want to do with this bishop? Yeah, we want to go to e3, but what's stopping us? Yeah, knight g4. So how do we stop him? h3. Wonderful. So h3 here, a5. Now we don't lose patience. We continue with bishop e3. We get takes on e4. How do you want to take back? Yeah. So in the game, I took with the knight. And kind of a funny story here. I actually thought for a few minutes over which piece would be best to take with. In general, the knight tends to be correct. In this position, they're all pretty good, but the knight is the best. Now, why is that? Well, you control all these nice squares, and you open up this f3 idea. So that's why we took with the knight. Knight c5. And how to continue here?
Find a way to defend the e4.
Got to defend e4. So what should we do? Any of the ways is fine. Yeah.
What you did was bishop f3.
Yeah. So I did bishop f3, as you might remember. However, the best idea, surprisingly, bishop f1, preparing f3 in this weird g4 idea, highlighting that the knight is trapped. So bishop f3, bishop to e6, sort of a mistake by black. Now, how do we respond? He's attacking our pawn. Yeah, just b3, staying solid, not trading pieces. Knight back to d7. Played rook a to c1, not really a key move. Rook a to d8, ignore the arrows. So what do we want to do here?
Gain space on the queen side.
Yeah, gain space on the queen side. But again, any of the ideas are fine. Bishop e2, f4, also still a great idea. So I played a3 first, going for a3, b4, gaining space. We got bishop f6, bishop back to e2, understanding that this bishop doesn't actually belong on f3, it belongs on e2, supporting our queenside advance. Knight to a6. And now how do we prepare the tactic? Queen b1, that's exactly right. Preparing b4. By the way, if black doesn't hang the tactic, we do something just totally awful, like queen to b8, we are actually going to play b4. It's not like a bluff. Queen b1, I do want to play b4 and expand over here on the queen side. And this is a good idea. It's securing a bigger advantage for white. So queen b1, but our opponent plays knight b6, and what's the tactic?
Knight d5.
Knight d5, winning the game. But yeah, you had a question, Brian?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering more concretely how that advantage would have, how you would have capitalized on this queenside advantage.
Yeah.
If that's possible to answer.
So b4, a b4, a4. And first and foremost, it's just highlighting that these two knights are going to be much worse than they otherwise would have been. But concretely, I think you can play b5 almost right away. And the point is that if black takes, which black probably has to take, otherwise you might just win this pawn on c6. So let's put some moves on the board. I'm kind of curious what's happening after knight e5. I think we will just go b5. So do we have an immediate threats? Yeah, we're threatening this knight. Let's say black does take. Now this is opening up the b5 square for us to attack this pawn. It opens up this diagonal still. And you know, we're just increasing the pressure, basically. Once we open things up on the queen side, then we start to bring our pieces in that direction. And I think it's going to be very strong. Let's check. Am I lying? It's like +2 here. And just to show you, we're even expanding on this side of the board. And yeah, the engine evaluation only grows here. It wants to play king h1. You don't have to play king h1. Everything is just going to be very, very strong. So we expand on the queen side. We get new squares for our pieces, new ideas, and we keep on rolling. Even like g4, I imagine would be very strong. Something like g3, bishop back to f3 even, e5 ideas. Just to put a move on the board, if you want to play something super, super simple, rook to d2. Okay, you do have to look out for d5, but it's still totally, totally winning for white. Black just has a tactic, so we'll defend the tactic. And now I imagine these kinds of moves start to be very strong. Yeah, like knight a7 is the best move, and we really are just piling up on d6 now. Let's see, can I do even better here? Yes, I can. I can just take f4, and everything goes backwards. Everything goes backwards. You just get all of the space. All of the space is the idea. Okay. Okay, but instead, we get the tactic. Knight d5, takes, and now it's very, very sad for black. So c5 happened. We played our knight to the king side and check. And now how do we continue ripping open the queenside files? Last question for you guys.
Before the end of the lecture?
Yes, b4 at the very, very end of the lecture. And yeah, again, we're not going to let black stop our ideas over here by playing c5. We just continue opening up diagonals, opening up files, and the rest is going to be easy. So the tactics work out for us. We win all the material, dodge a couple remaining threats, bishop d2, and our opponent hangs checkmate to end the game. So we spent the whole hour on this game. I didn't really expect to do that. I thought I was going to get to show more games, but that just means there's more for next week, I guess. So thank you guys very, very much for joining me here tonight. Be sure to stick around. Grandmaster Robert Hungoski is going to be here with Prepare Like a Pro, I think is the class. No, it's not. It's Grandmaster's Choice. Prepare Like a Pro is on Thursdays. So be sure to stick around for that. I love Robert's lectures. I think they're super entertaining and informative. And that's all from me tonight. So once again, thank you all very much for joining me. As always, my name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.